as people think about, okay, how do they become a great storyteller and then affect, their brand or whatever it may be, is deciding on what kind of story you want to tell.
Yeah.
You've got origin stories. You have the overcoming the monster. And then my favorite is the hero's journey.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to The Marketing Blender. I am Dacia Coffey, and I am being joined today by the fabulous Ryan Heath. Today's topic is the power of great storytelling in B2B marketing. And some of you guys have seen me speak, but I am an absolute nerd about storytelling. I've always been an obsessive reader. I'm a writer. I'm a speaker. I sometimes fancy myself as funny.
You are
but
funny.
I love great storytelling. Like, I love hearing it, participating in it, and learning the craft of it, no matter if it's in marketing or just in real life and conversation. And so I'm super excited because I know probably you match me in like your passion for this.
Well, who doesn't love a good story?
Yeah.
There's no question. I knew this was going to be a hot button for you coming in.
Yeah.
And so let's flip the script a little bit. And before we start talking about why this matters to B2B companies, to our clients, to everybody out there, Dacia, why do you love great stories?
To your point, I think there's just something fundamental, and actually there is. Like again, I'm a total nerd about this. So we actually know the brain is fundamentally wired to remember things in story framework and to pay attention to story and to literally release chemicals related to empathy and compassion when we hear and engage in stories, even if they're stories that have no relation to our own experiences.
Oxytocin.
That's right.
It's the trust chemical.
Yeah.
And storytelling unlocks that in ways that very few other things do.
Yeah. And I think that's the part where we technically know, but there's that, because I just love them, like there's just that magic. But honestly, the other thing is, well, there's really two components. Like being a chief marketing officer, leading a marketing agency, this is what helps us drive remarkable results. And the better you get at this, the more satisfying it is to be a part of this. It drives outcomes, but it's also better creative, like when you're tapping into this. And then this story is a tool of influence as well. And that is one of my personal passion projects, is unleashing people's individual potential and also organizational potential by maximizing their influence. And for me, influence is related to servant leadership. And so, man, just being able to communicate the human story and inviting people into that and just seeing what happens, I just love it. I can't stand, well, nobody can stand listening to somebody who can't tell a story.
Yep.
Where you're like, punchline, come on.
Where are we going with this?
Yeah,
Get us
exactly.
there. You just talked about inviting people in, which is great stories do that, but how? Why?
I think it's simply because we understand it, right? I mean, like, it's the fastest way to communicate the human experience, just period. And I would also argue that the meat and bones of a great story, yes, there's architecture and framework that I'm sure you and I will end up talking about this, but there is no story without emotion.
Yep.
And without conflict. And literally, we understand our lives in a framework of conflict and emotion. There's, basically only 6 core emotions. And so the more you can distill down the influence and the emotion that you are trying to elicit intentionally from an audience, the better you are at just culling out the nonsense and getting to the truth of things. Because even in business to business marketing, business to business decisions, we are still making emotional decisions. I'm frustrated by this problem. I'm sick and tired of not having this answer. I'm excited or passionate or intensely angry that my competitor is beating us, right? We make decisions, from software to hiring and firing decisions to marketing decisions to operational decisions, with emotional urgency that is the fire of progress. And so why would you not embed that in your communication?
Well, you just asked that great question. Why would you not? But we see it all the time. Going back to what you were talking about, just this overall concept of what makes a great story. When I think of phenomenal storytellers
Yeah.
or phenomenal stories. It can be in person or not. You're always kind of hanging on the edge of your seat
Yeah.
for what that next part is.
Yeah.
And it's walking this really interesting line between engagement and anticipation.
Yeah,
You know,
totally.
you want to have people in and invested in seeing where you're going, but you've got to craft it in such a way that there's always that little bit of question of, where is this going?
Yeah.
I think I know where this journey's taking me, but is it really? Is there a door that I didn't even know existed?
Yes.
Right? It's the game show. What's behind door number 1,
Yes,
2, 3? But that
exactly.
great story
Yep.
leads you to the possibility that there's a fourth door you didn't even know.
Yep.
And there's just so many ways that B2B companies can uncover those secret doors through really creative messaging.
I love that. And I love that the idea of secret door is so true. There's so many things they're just forgetting
Yep.
to deploy. I think naturally every human thinks that they're a good storyteller. We all know people that are terrible storytellers. But I don't think any of us ever think it's us. But the other thing is, for some reason, and you're kind of touching on this, when we put our business hat on, all of a sudden, everything that makes us interesting and human and all of the natural connective tissue and relationship, we have a tendency to compartmentalize it.
Right out the door.
Yeah, and it's so inappropriate, And so, for instance, case studies can be stories, but they rarely are, right? And so we think in framework of case study instead of transformation story. Oh my gosh, no, put them together. Yeah, sure. Talk about, your product in the wild, but talk about the human side of what it did for someone, or talk about the cautionary tale, or tell the story of the big aha moment on why you uncovered a certain way to do things better than your competitors. There's so many stories. And it's interesting because if you were to tell somebody outside of your industry anything about your business, you're immediately going to flesh the jargon and go, okay, well, let me just tell you the story, right? Because if you don't, if I'm selling, whiz-bang little gadgets and jigamazoos that you don't know anything about, I'm going to tell you the thing that you do know about, which is the human experience and the aha moment and the emotion, no matter if you don't know the engineering jargon or the consulting, speech.
Right.
I'm going to flesh all that away. And so why are we killing human communication in B2B marketing? It's crazy.
You nailed it. It's the B2B part. B2C does this innately all the time because they're selling to people. Why is it that we think businesses are different? Businesses are simply conduits for people.
It's groups of people.
Ultimately, that's what we're
Yeah.
doing, and we disassociate the people and the products so often.
Yeah.
And again, door number 4, what a missed opportunity, because ultimately, all of these solutions, these incredible solutions that people come up with, were created to solve people problems.
Exactly. Okay, I want to ask you a question real quick, because since you're a musician and an educator, you have an interesting take on storytelling, because how the heck do you do it when you don't have words?
Well, phenomenal question, and I'm glad you brought it up. Music is in and of itself one of the ultimate story delivering vehicles.
Yeah.
Hundreds and hundreds of years ago, it was entertainment.
Yeah.
It's where opera came from. We have musicals now. Household names, Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, they told incredible stories. Wagner, oh my goodness, told just incredibly compelling stories. Music captures a part of us that words really can't capture.
Yeah.
There's something innate in each of us emotionally that music brings out. And I've been asked, all the time by folks that aren't musicians, hey, who's your favorite composer? And for me, it's John Williams. He's America's greatest living composer. John Williams has written the soundtrack to our modern lives in so many ways. Go watch any of his movies with the sound off, or get on YouTube. There's plenty of folks that have taken the music out, and it's entertaining, and you kind of laugh. The one that just gets you is when you take the music out of Schindler's List.
Yeah.
And Maestro Williams himself says that it's the most impactful thing that he's written, and it's so incredibly subtle.
Yeah.
Music can tell stories, music can accentuate stories in ways that nothing else can, in the same way that great storytelling can accentuate a brand, a product, a company, that the brand or product or company by itself just can't do.
Yeah, one of our team members, in his video work, he starts everything with music first. So he will listen, read the brief, get a sense of the culture and the brand guidelines, and then pick the music that he feels tells the story, and then adds words, figures out the storyboard, and and it's so effective because he really does such a great job with the story that it doesn't matter the budget. And so I know he always wants a $100,000 video, but even the $500, $300 videos are so powerful because of that thinking, where it's emotion first, story through music, and then story through story framework for the most dry industries. And it's just super cool.
I know we're talking B2B, but I can think of several incredible commercials that are nothing but images and music.
Yeah.
And that's all you needed.
Yeah.
And no words, no copy, no text. A emotional connection that's simply communicated through what we see and what we feel.
Yeah.
Through the soundtrack.
Exactly. Okay, so here's what I suggest. Let's share with them the anatomy of the story and kind of some architecture around story, because there really is some education and some right and wrong ways to do it. I personally would love to talk about ways to do it verbally as an influential communicator.
Great.
Like whether you're a salesperson or whether you're a speaker or whether you're a founder and you're trying to figure out how to communicate, whether it's internal. I want to share some of my personal tools, things that I've been taught, things I've figured out. And then let's try to throw some examples in there too, to get people's creative juices flowing. Am I forgetting anything?
No, and one of the important things as people think about, okay, how do they become a great storyteller and then affect their brand or whatever it may be, is deciding on what kind of story you want to tell.
Yeah.
You've got origin stories, you have the overcoming the monster, and then my favorite is the hero's journey.
Ryan brings up such a good point, and I wanted to pause on this. There is a theory in story structure that there really are only 7 stories that we tell over and over and over. So for instance, it's overcoming the monster. Another one is rags to riches. We've got the quest story. We also have an interesting one that's voyage and return. This one can be a little weird, like Alice in Wonderland or something like that, but there's a journey and then a return to sanity or to logic. We have comedy, we have tragedy, and then we also have the rebirth story. So think the phoenix rising from the ashes. And so these frameworks are trustworthy, recognizable human stories that are deployed over and over and over. So anyways, I wanted to just nerd out with everybody.
Absolutely.
Because you bring up such a good point. And these can be really interesting. We used to, in some of our truth and branding sessions, like brand strategy sessions, if we had a founder in the room, we would listen for which story their real story was.
Yep.
And so often you would hear the phoenix rising or the rags to riches, or that they are battling something that's broken in the world, which is, overcoming the monster, or, and so cool, because once you know the core story, man, you can really unleash some really interesting and very resonant marketing, using those stories.
Absolutely. For everybody watching, step number 1, know what your story is. Right? Go through those 7, write your origin story down, so to speak, and then just start asking yourself questions. Because really, having that information, that's step 1 to where do we go next?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the second thing I would say, when we're thinking about structure of a story, because we're going to get more into it, but just top level, right? Stories are about transformation.
Yes.
There is no story without conflict, and there is no story without emotion. And so thinking through, how does a person feel? What is the conflict that they're overcoming in their business that you help solve? And what's their happily ever after, once they're on the other side? I really would rather see a transformation story than a case study. One is highly effective, so rapidly understood, and the other is dry and boring. So, so I always want just people, if I'm like, calm down, don't overthink storytelling, like start with what's the transformation you create. And you probably create a couple different ones. So it's another framework that people can think through what's their story.
I'm glad you brought up the case study part, because we're trained to look and analyze data and make logical, rational decisions, and that is the truth, right? But every story ultimately relates to the human condition.
Yeah.
And the human condition is messy.
Yeah.
There is joy and there is tragedy. There are challenges to overcome and challenges that are overcome.
Yeah.
We live this, each of us lives this every single day.
Yeah.
And if you really want to relate to people, tell their story.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about the anatomy of a great story.
Yeah.
And we just talked through all the different kinds, but they all have some similarities to them in the way that they kind of talk through that journey.
Yeah.
Take the hero's journey, for example.
Well, and I would, I would argue that that's always the story. So I, not being an educator, I like to oversimplify, and this sounds terrible, but it's true. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end to story. And the beginning of a story is that there is a hero, and that hero has a very specific emotional experience of the world. They might hate their current present situation. They might be burdened. They might be bored. They might be living their best life and smiling and waving, but they have an experience and a perspective on their current state. And then the middle of the story is conflict.
Absolutely.
A psychological crisis, a divorce, a tornado, right? Like a monster, a dragon, like it doesn't matter, but like a bankruptcy, a bad decision, like a personal failure, a character flaw. Conflict happens and they now have to go through the process of battling that conflict. And then the final one, the happily ever after, is two components. How do they feel about their future state now? And more importantly, how did they change? How did it personally change them? Not just they slayed the dragon or they saved the kingdom, or they found true love, but who did they become as a person? And and sometimes some great stories that you see them deteriorate into a worse version, think Darth Vader.
Absolutely.
And how those play out. And, and others people transform into the best version. But either the transformation or the lack of transformation, what could have been, who they were before and who they became is critical for great storytelling.
And both of those are valid. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about stories that have a happy ending when we begin relating this to B2B, because ultimately those positive feelings sell.
Yeah.
And I don't want to bury this too much because I want to talk about this later on, but being able to relate stories of failure is one of the most relatable things that we can do.
Yeah.
There is not a single one of us that hasn't failed in some form or fashion. And when we get fed happy-go-lucky, Pollyanna, type things all the time, it's really inauthentic.
Yeah, 100%.
Failure is authentic. It's a part of the natural human condition, and we shouldn't always run from it, because the reality is every one of our business owners out there has failed so many times, and the great ones will lead with that.
Yeah, and it's the courage, because the thing is, first of all, there's failure, but then there's the decision to not turn it into your identity, but to win or learn, right? So the progress. And there is the transformation that we're talking about. That you used failure to help you turn into a better version of yourself. But then the storytelling component is vulnerability. So I'm getting up here and I'm going to be vulnerable with you, meaning I'm building connection, but I'm also exhibiting rare courage to share that I wasn't perfect, and that doesn't deteriorate the value I can bring for people. And man, I'm a big believer that charisma is about authenticity, not about smiling and waving, boys, you know, like just having the showmanship. Like some people, sure, some people do, but I've seen amazingly painful introverts have just powerful charisma on stage because they know who they are and they stand in it, and you're just captivated once you lay your story on top of that, and especially if it's a failure story where they're able to share their heart and their transformation.
Okay, a perfect example of why authenticity is so important is podcasting.
Yeah.
Like, look at what we're doing right now. But
Yeah.
you think about it, you know, when podcasting came onto the market, it was one of the first times in media that literally everybody had a chance to tell their story.
Yeah.
But the way it developed was so organic that no single corporate entity was able to grab it and put rules on it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The market literally dictated what was going to be successful. We like to think that every industry is like that, but they all get molded and influenced, you know, once this single thing, once the big corporation grabs it and takes it. That never happened with podcasting.
Yeah.
You know, the podcasters that you love, that you will always check in on, are the ones that are the most authentic.
Yeah.
People's BS meter is way more developed than I think a lot of us want to admit.
Yeah.
Podcasting works because you are getting someone's authentic self. Folks that aren't, their podcasts aren't successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's the exact same when we're talking about how are we going to help someone, or how is someone going to help themselves market their company.
Yep. I love it. You know, and I think that's such a great segue into like different examples, right? So we already talked about case studies versus transformation stories and how to deploy that in a different way. You know, another one is this Q&A format, you know, where you're literally getting to hear. And so you've got, a passionate host that is just ripe with curiosity, and you don't put limitations, then it can really just bring out this natural, amazing story. And as humans, we have a tendency to pull that out on each other because it's how we understand life. You know, one of my favorite B2B marketing plays was ages ago. GE did this big scholarship for engineers, and basically they challenged people to, you know, young up and coming engineers to prove a traditional cliche wrong. And so one of the winning ones was, can you unring a bell, right? And so they used technology, and they put a baby under this huge bell in Asia and used technology to like reverse the sound waves so that this massive thing that can typically be heard for miles and miles couldn't be heard by the sleeping child right underneath. Cool. And there were so many neat ones, but it's a really great example of, instead of talking about, we are innovative, we are GE, innovation drives the world, they literally just said, you know, go be innovative. They came up with something really, really interesting, and then through visuals, you know, and video, told the story of these powerful innovations. And they didn't have to tell me anything about the technical. Now, anybody technical is going to be super curious, like how'd they do that? But man, it's the story that gets you in.
Yeah, when you can get the lay people and the nerds in one ad campaign, you've hit the jackpot.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so another one, and because copywriting is temporarily dying a little death, it is absolutely not dead because of AI, and we're seeing really shoddy writing right now because of it. But because right now it's on temporary hiatus, we don't hear a lot about like the tools that really amazing screenwriters and copywriters use. And one of them is a through line, right? Like if you distill everything down to the most finite point, and it can be a single word or one sentence, you know, how do you carry that through? And another example recently is one of our insurance company clients. Their through line is speed. Now, there are tons of B2B clients out there that are like, we're faster, we're this, more efficient. But their through line, dialing down to speed, they deployed comedy on top of it, right? And so then they have hilarious scenes where like, there's an insurance agent walking a cheetah through the office, and you know their insurance agents are wearing backpacks, like fire backpacks, and it's every possible silly metaphor for speed being deployed through comedy in a traditionally dry environment. And that is storytelling. And they're storytelling in GIFs, they're storytelling in social media, and it's so fun watching this in what a lot of people would portray as one of the most boring, environments for marketing. And it's really great marketing.
Yeah, and the courage that it takes to do that is key, and we'll talk about in a minute. So as we go through some of the places where storytelling lives in marketing, before we get into it, we talked about podcasting, and that's something that we do deploy for some of our clients.
Oh, for sure.
Not just inviting them here, but helping them build their own platform.
Yep.
Why does that matter? Where is that valuable?
So many different ways. I will try to distill this as quickly as possible. On the technical side, of course, now that large language models and AI are now listening to what we say, we can rank in search, and you need to create a richer ecosystem for which search to pull from. So we love video, we love YouTube, we love video in all social media platforms. We want to see a rich environment there, and we want to see great conversation because we know it's really working. So I like the multi-point deployment of that. But thought leadership, it's sexy, but thought leadership doesn't always rank with Google, and so it's a way to have your cake and eat it too, where you can answer a question that people really need and then also insert a unique and important framework, and then people believe people.
They do believe people, and it's the authenticity.
Yeah.
Right? I'm so glad you brought up thought leadership. I wonder what percentage of thought leadership articles, posts on LinkedIn are actually written by people.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about copywriting. A huge amount of it, we've all done it, is AI generated. Mm-hmm. But you can't AI generate. Okay, you can AI generate a podcast. Let's be real.
Laugh.
But one
Laugh.
that, exactly. But one that works, one that people connect to.
Yeah.
No, that is still a really true, authentic human moment. And you're right. The way that the algorithms are changing and evolving, that authenticity is still being valued in a way that very few things are.
Yeah, and in our authenticity, like going back into structure, there's 12 character archetypes, across most storytelling. Now, while this gets into way more nuance because you have primary and secondary and you can blend these characters, sometimes you have a villain only or an outlaw only or a hero only, but not usually. Like you usually have a mix of a sage and a caretaker, or a villain and an adventurer, something interesting like that. But it goes back to the authenticity part, is they're not expecting you to be a different character than you are. Everybody likes to be like, oh, he's going to say this, or like, I get his personality or get his point of view, right? And like, we play characters. And great B2B marketing, like the more you can exaggerate your character, the more you exaggerate your resonance, because then people are like, oh, I understand that character. Mm-hmm. Like, I understand that they're going to bring a lot of heat and passion, or I understand that they're going to be contrarian, or I understand that they're going to be really nurturing, and so we can more quickly cut through nonsense to be like, okay, you're super trustworthy and you play this role for me in this environment, and I like that and I appreciate that. And so I think that's and this goes into the personal branding, one that we did not too long ago, but you don't need to be anybody else but yourself. And so having a podcast or video or stories in any format, like it gives you an opportunity to just share your value. Not prove it, not make it up, but like just be who you were created to be, give the value that you can, and help people understand you as fast as possible.
Speaking of places that sometimes we have a hard time being authentic, let's talk about websites for a second.
Yeah.
It's everyone's front porch.
Yeah.
But boy, do we see clients struggle with who they think they should be and who they are when putting their website together.
Yeah, I love this. Love. So there's a couple things I'm immediately looking for anytime I'm auditing a website. I immediately want to see mirroring.
Yep.
Right? Like, and mirroring, if you're mirroring on your website, you are showing images or lines or video that are a mirror for the audience that is showing up there. So they're like, oh, that's me, that looks like me, that sounds like me, that's exactly what I was curious about. So we're immediately looking for mirroring. There's not a right or a wrong on you always have to have an about us video, or you always have to have a video on the homepage. We do believe it converts higher, but you've got to be really thoughtful about what is the narrative. Too often, especially if it's a family, multifamily, multi-generation business or family-run business, they want to tell, we're a family-run business. Does your market care? And if so, why? Because it's not what you think. Like the story that you will tell your grandkids about your family may or may not be the story that resonates with the market, right? So we do sometimes love multi-generation families, but why? Right? It's getting to the heart of the mirror. Like, what is it about that story that helps people to understand you faster? Like, what's the role you really play in the world? Photos, images, like graphics are supposed to tell a story just like that.
Yep.
I want to see a photo that if you had no more words, the people would be like, oh, yep, I know what they're communicating here. And that's possible. It's possible in every single image that we choose. There's always a story, and people are so lazy about the photos they deploy. Just grab something off of stock. Like show a narrative. There's so many places where story lives. Static images, video, music,
absolutely,
taglines, through lines, like, power verbs. Oh my gosh, so many.
Well, or you talk about the imagery, or now, just go generate something with AI.
Yeah.
That is like, transcendental to what it is they're doing. I heard great branding described one time. You're talking about the images. How many times will folks just want to throw a graphic up of like, look, here's the numbers on our, here's the type of ROI that we can provide for you. That's valuable information, but that's not necessarily always the most useful graphic. I heard great branding described one time as instead of starting with, we're marketers.
Yeah.
I take the approach that you've done here with Blender is, we believe in a world in a business world where there is prosperity and success for all.
Yeah.
Like that's what we lead with.
Yeah.
And then the next circle of that of that we care about our people.
Yeah.
We care about our clients. We just happen to do these things through marketing.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's reversing the funnel in some ways, so to speak. And
Yeah.
when we think about great websites, when I think about great websites, they tell that story. And then you kind of get to what it is they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like our website is a really great example. We deploy a lot of athletic images and outdoor and visceral images, but it's because that's what it feels like to be a privately held company. Like, like sometimes
it's a sprint
feel
sometimes.
Yes, like you're sprinting or you're struggling or you're being knocked down. The emotion of what it takes to strive is what every entrepreneur and every leader in our kind of industries understand.
Yeah.
And we didn't have to show people sitting behind computers working on their SaaS product or, in manufacturing. Now, we also show those, in order to create alignment. But, we're deploying so many images in a story framework, and it's happening like quick, because we want to deploy emotion where people are like, man, they get it.
They
like,
do.
They
Well,
get me.
and there's joy in that struggle.
Yeah.
Which is something that our entrepreneur clients understand as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I would be remiss, especially on Daisy's behalf, if we did not talk about deploying fascination triggers.
Oh my goodness.
I love the book by Sally Hogshead, Fascinate, and understanding from a character and story standpoint. Do you have a prestige trigger, an alarm trigger, a trust trigger? Is it mystique? But there's 7 core fascination triggers that, again, that's an emotional narrative that you can communicate that pulls people in. Like, okay, I get you. And I mean, there's just so many tools that people are not using in their B2B marketing.
Here's another one I want to get to because we're seeing such a renaissance of this as email nurture and email sequences.
Yeah.
We've been looking at this even just over the past week of some incredible email campaigns put together by our fractional chief marketing officers with click-through rates that we haven't seen in a decade.
Yeah.
Each of them, the commonality is across industries, but the commonality that they have is they tell an incredible, compelling story immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and most of us probably follow at least one extremely talented email marketer. And the framework is always the same. They open telling a story and they leave with a cliffhanger, and you get to know them, and it's little glimpses where they're connecting a story in their life to a lesson that they're sharing with you. You know, and I mean, for any of my, you know, B2B marketing nerds out there, you know, I mean, like the traditional long sales letter that you flip on its side and deploy through email always deploys story every single time. Like, that's why they're super effective. And when you start to recognize it, you're like, yeah, why aren't we doing that? Yeah, why aren't you doing that? I have a couple like things I want to pull into around if you're, and I'm so curious to hear what yours are. Like, if you're telling a great story in person. So whether you're a salesperson, you know, whether you're a leader and you're sharing something with the team, whether you're around like the fire in your backyard and some of your friends and neighbors are over, you know, like just some of the things that make the telling of a great story, like great, you know, like for an audience. So I'm gonna go through a couple. And so I'm so curious if you've got any specific. Now, we've already talked about emotion as a must have. Vulnerability is a nice to have and a preferred to have, right? We typically prefer stories of failure versus I'm so much better than you, buddy, right? But a lot of times it's the details. Like, for instance, like I learned this from a speaking coach online, actually, like on YouTube. And they referred to bringing a person into the moment or kind of into the room. And it was something that I was doing accidentally. And when I realized it was something specific that I could tighten up. And so, for instance, you know, there's a story that I tell a lot of times. It was an important turning point in my, you know, my family's life. And I will say, you know, it was a fall day. My kids were in elementary school. You know, my boys at the time, 2 of them were towheads, and they just gotten out. We just picked them up from elementary school and zooming around on their bikes and scooters. Mom, look at me. Mom, look at me. And, you know, Texas falls are hot. And so it's a little steamy, but it was beautiful. Like, I can remember because it was late afternoon, how the light was coming and we're on a walk. And I can remember looking at this, and all of a sudden my husband stops. And I'm like, babe? And he has this look on his face. And he was like, we've got to get out. So that's an example of taking somebody into the room, because people can understand a mom on a walk with her husband, you know, the kids zooming around, like what it looks like on a fall day in like a suburban neighborhood. And immediately you're like transported through time and space right there. So then what happens in the story, like you get it, like you all of a sudden kind of become me, or you become like my shadow because you're there in the room with me.
Yeah.
And that's so powerful. And people forget to say things like I was freezing cold, or I hadn't eaten that day, or it was winter, or you know what I mean? Like I was sitting on this type of chair and I could hear the tick, 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 tick. And so I was getting very irritated. You know, I mean, so many details where people are like, oh, I know exactly how that feels, you know, and we leave that kind of substance out. And it's incredibly powerful. And you don't need an hour to do this. You can change 2 sentences to dramatically transform the effectiveness of listening to a story for an audience by being as human as possible, which is, it felt like this, I touched that, I was in this room, you know, like I was confused, and it goes back again to the emotion, the vulnerability, you know, but allowing people to be in that moment with you.
Well, before you finish that story, because there's no way that you're going to be able to leave
I am definitely
everybody.
not finishing that story. That's another one.
The cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger. Exactly. Especially in marketing.
Well, you hit on, you know, I call it's setting the scene, right? And the example I like to use with this is a story that I would tell students all the time, and I'll tell it the way I heard it, because the actual event itself was not nearly as interesting as the first story that I heard. And it's a commencement speech that Winston Churchill gave. And I'm going to bury the lead. It is the actual event is not nearly as dramatic as the way I first heard it painted. But at some point after the Second World War ended, Winston Churchill was invited to come over to the States and present a commencement address at a university. And, you can imagine the excitement in the arena. All these students getting ready to set forth on their own journeys, and they're getting ready to hear the words of wisdom of one of the greatest leaders, not just of their time, but of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a person who stood in the face of the most incredible adversity that anyone had,
Yeah.
and not just captivated the trust of a nation, but of the entire world. And what an incredible way to begin your own journey than these words of wisdom.
Yeah.
And they're all sitting there in rapt attention, and the president of the university, introduces, please welcome Sir Winston Churchill, and there's thunderous applause that goes on for minutes. And Sir Winston, with his famous bowler hat on, his cigar in his mouth, exactly as they pictured him, walks up to the podium, and he takes the cigar out of his mouth. He sets it down. He takes the hat off of his head. He sets it down, and he looks around the room, makes eye contact with so many students, and he allows the silence to sit there for 20 seconds. And the energy is palpable. What they're going to hear is going to change their lives. They know it.
Yeah.
And he looks at them and he says, never, ever, ever, ever give up.
Yeah.
He puts the hat back on his head. He puts the cigar in his mouth, and he leaves the stage. But there was no better advice that
Yeah.
he could give them.
Right.
And it summed up everything that, he was. Now, the reality of that story is that Churchill got up there, he kept his hat on, he kept the cigar in his mouth, and he gave the statement, and he walked off because he was pressed for time. But therein lies the power of setting the scene,
Yeah.
and, creating that anticipation. There are so many ways you can do this in marketing.
So many ways.
Yes. And we talked about websites a second ago.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, your main landing page can do exactly that
Yeah.
as you scroll through. But boy, we bury the lead
Yeah.
so often.
Yes. Or hooks. Hooks are so often about curiosity, and really talented, and most of them, honestly, the really great social media folks, hook, payoff. And if they're really good, hook, double hook, payoff to get longer watch time, but they understand how to deploy curiosity. And examples of that are things that they know we just can't ignore.
Yeah,
right?
well, things you can't look away from. You just talked about hook and payoff, tension and resolution.
Yes, it's the same. Yes, exactly.
There's a reason we all stopped to look at car wrecks.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
I will totally admit to doom scrolling, and I hate it. I try not to, but man, I will get stuck on things where there's a lot of tension. Where there's a story being told that I'm like, this is a little bit uncomfortable. I have to see how this ends
Yes.
because I want it to have a happy ending.
Yeah, exactly. And and I'll give examples okay, does this make me does this make me a,
Right.
you
Whatever.
have to find out what did they do for them to be asking that
Yes.
question, as an example. Or the thing that got me fired, that should be outlawed. Okay, what? Okay, first of all, I definitely want to hear how you got fired. And I definitely want to hear why it's so ridiculous it should be outlawed,
Yep.
or those are examples. And so human conditions, don't ever do this at your wedding.
No.
Things think about really resonant situations that, and typically it has to do with familiarity.
Yeah.
Where it's something that you're like, that you just, that you have to pay attention to. And that is an art, but there's a way that you can learn to do that, become better at it, and you can deploy it for any industry, any scenario, but it really is about great storytelling.
So let's talk a little bit about why sometimes our clients, sometimes ourselves, resist that when we're going about putting our marketing campaigns together.
It's super simple, which it doesn't make sense. It's not logical, but it is simple. People are so scared that this will slow down success like that it's too slow or it's too soft, that it's not on point, right? Like people will think, well, if I'm selling a widget, I need to talk about a widget. You know what I mean? And so it feels counterintuitive that I'm going to tell a story about a core value, or I'm going to tell a story about an aha moment or anything like that when I just need to sell a widget. And so they feel different. And unfortunately, like that's just fear, false evidence appearing real. Like they're really they're so worried that that's personal and that's just for fun, and this is business. Like it goes right back to the top of the conversation, where I do think people feel like if I slow down, but this is, if you want to call it slowing down, which it's not, you can tell a great story in 30 seconds, but this is slowing down to speed up. You're speeding up memory, you're speeding up resonance, you're speeding up understanding, you're speeding up clarity, and you're speeding up the ability for them to like you.
Yep.
Come on. And you're speeding up their desire to pay attention to you and stay engaged with you. We talk about in B2B marketing that 7 to 13 touches just to get a marketing qualified lead. How do they pay attention to those touches? You tell a story, right? Like that's why it's so powerful marketing. And it's even more powerful if you want to cut friction out of a sales process. Man, turn your salespeople into influencers. And when I say influencer, I don't mean social media influencer. I mean influencer of other humans. Like teach them stories, teach them great communication skills, but it always boils down to stories.
Yeah, and storytelling can also be a great fast track to stickiness and loyalty.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
People
and referrals, because they can retell a story.
Oh, no question.
Yeah.
We've talked about case studies several times. Sometimes they're not most flattering terms because the average case study is boring. But a great case study that is primarily telling your client's story, in a way of yes, you were a part of it, but really you're telling your client's story. And we go back to the hero.
Key.
It is key. We go back to the hero journey for a second. Sometimes what we see is clients that will be really interested in telling their story, but they're a little bit confused of what their role is in the story.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that that you're not the hero in the story. Your clients are the hero in the story. You probably started out as the hero. You created your product, you created your company because there was a challenge. There was something in that story that you and I can overcome this.
Yeah.
I'll make a Star Wars analogy. You were Luke Skywalker at one point, right? But that's your client now. You're Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're the guide.
Yeah.
But when you tell your client's story and allow their journey, to be told.
Yeah.
Boy, the stickiness and loyalty from them is going to go through the roof. It's something we all know, but it's something we don't always commit to a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I want to do a quick hit because I want you to react to some common excuses that we hear.
Okay.
That's too emotional. We're a serious company.
There's no such thing. Even being serious. Like most serious people are angry or impatient, and those are nuances that are way more interesting. Yeah, so that's garbage. There's no such thing as, oh, did you know if the emotional center of the brain is damaged, people can't make decisions? Like there's some pretty famous, horrifying but famous studies, around patients that had gotten like that portion of their brain, and they irrevocably damaged, and they can't even decide what to eat for breakfast.
Yeah.
And it's the emotion of their brain, like, oh, I feel like that, or that sounds yummy, and they have no context. Should I go right or left to get to the gas station? And they will literally sit there for hours because they can't. So anyways, that's nonsense. There's no decision making without emotion.
Let's stick to the facts. The data is what matters.
Well, you should be telling a data story, because data and stories about context. Like there's no big unless you've defined little. There's no up or high unless you've defined low or down. Like that is a story, right? Even like data stories can even be, how many times would this thing wrap around the planet, right? Like there's interesting small little storytelling tricks that you can do that can give resonance and clarity to a number or to a fact. So no, that's absolutely nonsense too. And also, so like some of the memory studies, there was a famous study where they showed college students like a board, and they flashed up a whole bunch of different shapes, like just random, like circles and squiggles and rhomboids and hexagons, whatever. And they would show it to him for a while, and then poof, it would go away. And they simply asked all the students in the auditorium, just recreate on your piece of paper the same, what you saw on the screen, to the best of your ability. And then they would interview the students who got the closest. And without fail, the people that did the best, when they said, well, how did you remember? They would always make up a story. They would go, oh, well, it's so simple. The big circle was being so mean to that poor little triangle, the squiggles, so his buddies were coming in being like, pew, pew. But they would literally make up a story of meaning out of absolute meaningless shapes and nonsense. And that's how our brains work. So, yeah, that's nonsense.
Here's a couple I know are gonna get you riled up. And this is one we've dealt with. Our compliance team won't go for that.
Oh, okay. Yes.
And that's real.
The compliance team is great, but it means that they're forgetting who the hero is. If you are so focused, finance companies, insurance companies, on the exact little lever, tool, legal aspect of your product offering, you're not telling a story.
Right.
So you don't have to, yes, you have to worry about that. Yes, your compliance and any description of your product or offering absolutely needs to be fully compliant. But great marketing is not in the details. We've said this before. You brought up the Luke Skywalker one. No one is wondering what is inside of the lightsaber.
Right.
Never. And they would never pause that movie to explain why one is red and one is green. We are fine without the details. And all of us as business buyers are fine without the details on the marketing side. There is a point where they have to validate, and they have to bring their critical thinking, and they have to navigate that. But still, story, especially inside of marketing, is the framework. And so if you're having compliance issues, it's because you're looking in the wrong place for a story, or you're not even trying to find one at all.
Or remembering where you are in the process. And we could replace compliance with legal or finance and all boxes that must be checked. But you're right, it's not the first box.
Yeah.
And you do have to remember that just because you're not leading with it doesn't mean it's being skipped.
No, exactly. Because oftentimes a story is how you get around compliance, because we didn't touch the non-compliant stuff with a 10-foot pole.
Right. Exactly.
We allowed people to understand more quickly whether or not this is relevant for them. And that's the goal of marketing, is get them in the pipeline, get them curious, convert interest into inquiry. Compliance, you go do your job. Let me do my job.
Okay, last one. And this one seems like such a no-brainer, but we've heard this, but everyone else in our space talks like this.
Oh, and they're trying to be like them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're trying. Yeah. Okay, it's called differentiation, not samerentiation. What the? This is mind-blowing to me, and this happens so commonly in B2B, where they're like, yeah, but our competitors are blue. So why would you want to be blue? You are not them. And you're right. Well, yes, use technical language that is accurate and recognizable to your market, but don't go do what they're doing, and never assume that what your competitors are doing is working. It's usually not. It's usually not. So yeah, that one drives me nuts.
Let's take this to the next place. You've decided that you want to tell an awesome story through marketing. You're committed to it. You think your company or your product or, your people have a great story. Where do we go find those?
You remember good old-fashioned prompts?
Yes.
That your 6th or 7th grade teacher would force you to pick one for a creative writing exercise or for an essay? I love prompts. There's so many amazing prompts in Google or, through these really great storytellers where they're teaching you how to do it. And man, giving your team a prompt or letting them choose, I love shortcuts like that. I love going, okay, if we were to deploy one of the 6 core emotions, right, which is, sad,
right.
Sadness, anger, fear. So sad, angry, scared, and then happy, excited, and tender. Okay, if you're trying, and it's not that you have to launch this into the world, but just from a get it going. Like, what stories do you have, or what would you tell someone? Also, just looking back, I love, what are you fighting against?
Right.
What are you fighting for? Why? There's always stories behind that, you know, and I love cautionary tales. There's usually a cautionary tale where you can say, if you don't take my advice, this is what's going to happen. Cautionary tales are so profoundly impactful. We've taught beat to death transformation stories. Yep. You know, you were here, now you're in happily ever land. I mean, there's just a lot of different places, but I do like kind of those little diving boards where you can jump off of that and start to explore different. And I love the aha moment stories too. Like, how did you figure out you were going to change your business? How did you figure out that invention? Like, how did you figure out you were going to make that big change? Like, I could go on and on and on. But hopefully you wrote down all those prompts.
I was going to say.
And I just made it really easy on you.
I think you just uncovered all of them.
I don't know about that.
Well, but you just also highlighted sometimes why it can be such a challenge to figure out where to start.
Yeah.
And that's what I like to do, is to go back to the start.
Yeah.
You brought up the founder story, the founder's journey. And that often has an incredible power behind it, because there was a challenge.
Yeah.
You know, and there was a time where the solution didn't exist.
Yeah.
And starting there often leads you down all of the different paths that that your company has taken, your product has taken, your people have taken, and that's where you uncover all of those little stories that make the whole thing click.
Yep.
But I'll tell you what else I love is the one that we mentioned this earlier a little bit, is the one that people will usually run from, are failure stories.
Yeah,
and
100%.
And again, it is one of the most relatable human conditions. We need to be honest, not everyone has succeeded.
Yeah.
Not everyone has succeeded,
No.
but everybody has failed.
Yeah.
And chances are that somewhere along the way, even for the most successful companies, especially for the most successful companies, there's been failure along the way.
Yeah.
And so painting that very real situation creates an immediate relatability that very few things can.
Yeah.
You know, and when you think about how you structure that, you know, the setup matters. What was it we were trying to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, well, we had this problem. We thought this is how we were going to solve it, and we fell flat on our face.
Yep. Who doesn't want to listen to that?
Absolutely.
And then it gives you an opportunity to lead into thought leadership and aha moments, and potentially even differentiation in a really resonant way. So you guys, thank you so much for joining us. And what I hope that you got out of this is some new ways to approach your story. You probably have many, and maybe some jumping off points and just some different ways to think about how slowing down just enough to touch hearts with someone can actually speed up your success, speed up your sales, and speed up your outcomes. So thank you guys so much. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and we would love to hear your comments, arguments, resources. If you've got a great example of your storytelling, put it in the comments. Like, show the world. We would love to use it as an example on one of our future shows. Thanks, guys. Onward and upward.
The next episode is all the stuff that pisses Dacia off.
Yeah, actually, we could do lots of those episodes.
Have an actual box that just says soap on it. You got to stand there the whole time.
I think we should do a whole campaign on that. I love it.